Hey there. Welcome to part 8 of Romeo and Juliet, where we're going to start reading Act 3. So if you haven't read what you need to read yet, then go ahead and do that, and we're going to summarize it right away here. I can't believe we're already halfway through this play, or at least at the halfway point of the acts, Act 3 out of 5. Of Romeo and Juliet. Now, here is where some incidents really start picking up, because up to this point, the play could still have a happy ending. The last point we left off on was the fact that Romeo and Juliet are now married. The only thing that has to happen is for that tactfully to be publicly made known, and then the story could live happily ever after. The parents would be forced to accept the marriage, which, by the way, at this point in time, marriage is permanent. It doesn't end except by death. So there's no such thing as divorce. It's not like they can be unmarried. They are married. And so the families would have to accept that. So it's really neat to, from here on in, imagine scenarios or changes in the story that could actually keep it a happy, non-tragic ending. What are the things that would have had to change or gone a little bit differently? And we're going to see repeated ways from here to the end of the story of different decisions or just choices or events that could have happened that would have prevented this story from being a tragedy. But Act 3 really kicks off with this story starting to direct itself towards an utter tragedy. And it starts with this scene 1 where Romeo is, by the end of it, banished. So how does the scene start? Well, scene 1 starts in the open the open market or square or town city streets of Verona. Mercutio and Benvolio are out in the streets in the midday. This is after lunch on the same day that Romeo was married, presumably right after Romeo was married. So Tybalt is also out looking for Romeo, and Mercutio starts teasing Tybalt. Take a look at some of those lines. Now, Romeo does arrive for marrying Juliet, and Tybalt tries to fight him. But Romeo refuses, and look at why. Instead, Mercutio starts a fight with Tybalt, and we have the two others fighting. So Romeo's not fighting, but Romeo tries to stop the fight between them. Of course, he's invested in the Tybalt Capulet family, and as well as his best friend not fighting. But in helping them try to stop fighting, Mercutio is badly wounded by Tybalt's sword under Romeo's arm. So by pushing them apart, Romeo allows Tybalt to injure Mercutio. And Tybalt, they're separated, and Tybalt runs away or leaves the scene. Now, Mercutio is taken to a nearby house after he says some words, which we'll take a look at. And it comes back on stage, the news that Mercutio has died. In anger, Romeo now runs after Tybalt and accepts the challenge, and they do fight. Tybalt's killed, and this time Romeo has to run. Okay, a couple things to look at in those lines as well. Now, eventually, by the end of the scene, the Capulets and the prince have arrived, and Benvolio is there explaining what happened. And the prince has this decision to make. Remember, okay, this goes back to the very beginning when he says, whoever fights because of the feud again shall die. What's the sentence? They shall die. What should happen to Romeo? He should be killed. But the prince gives this more merciful punishment, and that is banishment. If you know what banishment is, it means you're kicked out of the town. And the prince does say, if he is seen, he is up for killing. So he shall be killed unless he leaves. If he comes back, he shall be killed. That's the punishment. Now, Mercutio says, good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives. Kind of I think that's where we get the saying, cats have 9 lives, or at least it becomes popular. Shakespeare takes that saying that may have been around at his time, that cats seem to have 9 lives, and Tybalt is referred to as a king of cats. Okay, and by fighting him, Mercutio can kill him once, and he'll still have 8 more lives left. Mercutio doesn't want to fight Romeo did not want to fight Tybalt. He said, I do protest, I never injured thee. But I love thee better than thou canst devise. I love you more than you even know. And why does Romeo say this to Tybalt? Okay, I can't tell you why, but I love you. I love your name. I love Capulet name. as I love my own. Okay, why would he say this stuff? He's speaking in riddle because nobody knows why he would say that. There should be worst enemies, but we know it because we know what happened in secret, and that is that Romeo just married into that family. He loves that family as much as he loves his own. Okay, and then Mercutio says, a plague on both your houses, repeatedly. A plague, okay, a curse on both your houses. If you use the word plague at the time when the bubonic plague was going through London, you mean a pretty heavy curse. So keep back in mind, actually, we know that the theater itself was shut down during the bubonic plague infestations, and much the same way that our public places are shut down today. So Shakespeare has lived through some time of his theaters or way of life or employment actually shut down from the plague. Now here you have the plague used as a curse, a plague on both your houses, utter destruction and death to your houses, says Mercutio. And that's his curse, some of his final words. And again, this is all foreshadowing what is about to come in terms of the tragedy of the story, this idea of death at the end. Okay? What does banishment mean for Romeo? Well, if you haven't picked up on that, it basically means you are exiled from the town. You cannot come back to Verona. And for Romeo, that means you can't see Juliet, which is exactly what we see him reacting to in scene 3. So then we keep going. In scene 2, it is Juliet now. It's back at her room, and Juliet is doing a soliloquy at the beginning of that scene where she's kind of longing for her marriage to be made public eventually, but also just to be dwelling or living with Romeo as husband and wife. So that's what she's talking about there. And then the nurse comes in and sobs about somebody dying. And Juliet initially thinks it might have been Romeo. We'll take a look at some of those lines. And the nurse does calm down enough to explain the events to Juliet, and she gets the full picture. And when Juliet learns that Tybalt has died, she becomes hysterical. When she knows that Romeo has been banished, that's his sentence, she becomes hysterical. So, unconsolable. All right. Now, I think she's a little bit more logical in her reaction to this than Romeo. I love scene 3 because it just shows how pathetic Romeo is, how heartbroken he is. He by the end of the scene or midway through the scene, he is having a little tantrum fit on the floor, face down, arms kicking and sobbing like a little baby boy. Okay. Where is Romeo? Well, in scene 3, he's with the friar. And the friar is the one who tells Romeo that he's been banished to Mantua. Mantua is a town not too far away from Verona. So he has to go somewhere else. So the plan is he'll go to Mantua. And through that whole discourse, Romeo is angry. He preferred death. Take a look at some of those lines. And Romeo threatens to kill himself. All of this is foreshadowing. Okay, every reference to taking of one's life or death or better is death or such and such is my grave. Romeo, he lays on the ground. He says, I'm measuring out my grave. Okay, all of that is kind of a foreshadowing of the death at the end of the story. Okay, again, Shakespeare can do that. He can just pack this full of foreshadowing. He's constantly reminding us that death is on the horizon, constantly, creatively too. Okay, who shows up at the friar's door knocking? It's the nurse. And she comes to the friar, and they make plans for Romeo to go and see Juliet that night, okay, to comfort her, right? To be with her on their wedding night so they can be husband and wife, and say their final goodbyes, because in the morning, before the break of dawn, Romeo will have to leave so he can escape the town and be safe in Mantua. Okay? In our scenes here, Juliet knows nothing about what's happened to Romeo immediately after their wedding. She says they'd been only married 3 hours before she hears the news about Tybalt. So it eventually comes to her. She knows about Romeo's banishment. Okay? And what does banishment mean for the two young lovers? We might think, okay, banishment means a little bit for Romeo, but it also means something for Juliet. They're married now. Okay? What happens one to one or the other involves one or the other now. It completely involves Juliet because now she can't, she has to be separated from Romeo too, by no choice of her own, by no fault of her own. And so Romeo, of course, does as well, but Juliet still suffers the consequence of that. So by the end of Act 3, Scene 2 and 3, we have Romeo departing to go and be with Juliet, to comfort her and to climb up that ladder into the balcony and, okay, be with Juliet on their wedding night. All right, let's go take a look at some of the lines from the story. All right, let's try to get into some of my top lines from the play text itself. So this is Act 3, Scene 1. You see it in in the scene they're out walking about in the afternoon, and that's what I want to go to. Is right away here, line 4. Benvolio is the one with common sense. He says, "For now, these hot days is the mad blood stirring. Sorry, if we meet, we shall not escape a brawl. For the mad blood is stirring." So it's early in the afternoon. The sun is hot. People's blood is boiling, and they're just quick to be aggravated. So he's like, "We're going to get into a brawl if we don't leave. Okay, if we don't go and rest and kind of rest our minds or whatever." This is foreshadowing because they, in fact, don't leave and they do get into a bit of a tussle and people die. So they should have left. They should have listened to Benvolio, and that's why I wanted to point this out. The day is hot. People aren't thinking clearly. We'd better go and retire in the shade, get our wits about us so that we don't get into trouble. Okay, the next line is a little bit a taste of Mercutio, if we can find it, and it is the consort one. Here it is. So Tybalt says, "Mercutio, you consort with Romeo. You hang out with Romeo." Well, a consort is a group of musicians, okay, who play music. So Mercutio puns off what Tybalt says. He takes the word consortist, hang out with, I guess, you're connected to Romeo. He says, consort, what does that make us, minstrels, musicians? Okay, and he kind of chirps back at him, and he says, "Okay, here's my fiddlestick. If I'm a musician, then here's my fiddlestick." And he pulls out his sword, okay, a fiddlestick. And okay, zounds, consort. How dare you tell me that I'm a consort? Okay, a musician or a group or whatever. He's punning off of that. So I wanted to give you an idea of some of Mercutio's words, how he can take a word somebody else says, throw a different meaning, make a cool comeback, and then essentially is saying, challenge you. Okay, he pulls out his sword. Here's my sword. Okay. Now, we're going to go to line 60 or so down here. Romeo eventually does come on the scene, and so Tybalt faces him and says, "Don't worry about it, Mercutio. Hold your peace, whatever. That's the guy I'm looking for. I'm looking for Romeo." By the way, do you remember why? Tybalt has already sent Romeo a challenge. This is kind of going on behind the scenes and setting us up to this scene right here. And that is, Romeo showed up to the party. Tybalt was angry, resentful, sends a challenge to Romeo the next day, and Romeo doesn't answer it. So Tybalt's out looking for Romeo and finds Romeo, and Romeo comes on the scene, and Romeo is told this: "Romeo, I hate you so much that the only thing I have to say to you is this. There's no better term than I could say to you is this." Ready? "Thou art a villain. You're a villain. You're a bad guy." And I kind of like look at this line because it's just such a cheesy insult. It must have been a good insult back in the day, but to call you're a villain. I'm sure you guys can think of way better insults to call somebody than "you're a bad guy." Okay. Romeo says, "I am not a villain." Okay. Villain am I none. I'm not one. Okay. And I excuse your anger. Okay. You know me not. I've never injured you. I love you better than you know. Okay. And we know why, because he's been married and he's now, Tybalt is effectively his cousin through marriage. All right. Now, for whatever reason, Mercutio is angry by this, and he's the one who takes up the challenge to fight Tybalt. And so they go ahead and do that. Mercutio is stabbed here. Here's another little phrase about Mercutio's punning. And he's a funny guy. Even at the moment of his death, he is whipping out jokes. I'd encourage you to go and watch the scenes I've shared from the various movies. They give you a perspective on this scene and how it can be depicted. And in one of them, Mercutio is joking around, even to the very moment he dies. And people are confused that they didn't think he was actually dead or not. And I think that's a very interesting way to depict this. Because he says this: Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. Okay, a grave man is somebody who's serious. You will find me a serious man, or a grave man, a man in a grave. You will find me dead. That's what he says. Okay, a scratch, somewhere else he says. Where is it? Okay, but it is enough. Okay, a scratch. Okay, it's not so deep as a well or wide as a church door, but 'twas is enough. A scratch. So it's not a huge gash or huge gash. It's not as deep as a well, obviously, or a church door, obviously. Mercutio is not even that big. But it's a scratch, relatively speaking, it is a scratch compared to that. But it's enough to what? Kill him. So he's joking even in his death. And that gives us a little glimpse at his character, that he's a jokester. He likes to pun. And even in his death, he's joking. Yet he is serious here too, because he says that a plague on both your houses. And then he tells Romeo, why'd you come between us? I was hurt under your arm. Okay. And he's taken off stage, and then the news is brought back in that he has died. Okay. Now Romeo goes ballistic here. We want to go to about 133. He eventually does fight Tybalt, and Tybalt is killed. All right. Now this is the point here. He says this: the prince will doom me death. This is Benvolio, because Romeo has killed somebody and fought, but effectively fighting due to the feud. And we know the punishment for that. I've already mentioned it. That is that you shall die if you fight because of the feud. Now Romeo says this: oh, I am fortune's fool. And here's where the theme of fate really starts to shine through. I am fortune, or my fate's fool. I have been a fool. I have stupidly entered into fate that is trying to drive me to destruction. Keep in mind, Romeo had the choice to not fight Tybalt still. Yet in his rage, in his anger, in his frustration, in his revenge, he does fight and eventually kills Tybalt. Now he's the fool, because he shouldn't have done that. He knows that. And I like that line. Oh, I am fortune's fool. Okay. He should have made a different choice. Now, the question is, could he have made a different choice, or was he actually doomed to make this choice? Okay. Is he fortune's fool because he's the victim of fortune? He's the victim of a fate that is going to, as we know, lead to his destruction in a matter of scenes here when we get to the end of the story. Now, I'll just keep, no, spoiler alert, Romeo continues to be fortune's fool. He continues to be at the mercy of fortune, or at the mercy of his fate, and will eventually end in his own destruction. Or death, okay, or tragedy, as we see. Okay. Then we go to line 150, and I think this is just to show you the prince asking, "Hey Benvolio, Benny boy, what happened here?" And so it's almost like a court scene here. The prince is looking for evidence. He wasn't there, and who's the one to give the testimony? It's Benvolio. Now, if you remember, Benvolio already did this in Act 1, Scene 1, when he was asked the question by the Montagues, "Hey, what happened here?" And he recounts the fight scene of that opening scene in the play. Well, he does it again here. Shakespeare again uses a character to recap what has just taken place on stage. Why? That's redundant. That's repetitive. But it really it really nails it down for us to not doubt what happened. Okay. Of course, Lady Capulet's giving a different story, but Benvolio was actually there. He's a good witness in this crime. All right. And then finally, we get to line 193 to the end, the actual judgment here. Okay. Prince has decided this, and I like this. It's a good judgment. He's a good prince. So Mercutio and Tybalt fought. Tybalt killed Mercutio. What should Tybalt's punishment be? Should be death. All right. It should be death. They were fighting because of the feud. Mercutio died standing up for Romeo, and it was a fight due to the feud. Tybalt should have died. See, by the way, if Romeo had left it alone, the law would have killed Tybalt. Tybalt would have already been dead or executed, okay? Now, they say this: well, Romeo carried out the law by killing Tybalt, who should have died anyways. Therefore, Romeo should not die. He carried out the law. And the prince is like, you're right. But in all of this, my relative, Mercutio, has died. So I am going to deliver a punishment. It is going to be harsh, and nobody's going to change my mind. What he says, the prince says, let Romeo hence in haste. Get him out of here. He must go now. Else, when he's found, it will be his last. In other words, he will die. So if anybody finds Romeo in Verona from this point on, he's a dead man. That's going to be important a little bit later on. If Romeo is ever found in Verona again, he is up for death, man. You could pick him off. He's fair game. All right, let's go ahead and jump ahead to the next scene. There. So Act 3, Scene 2 is the Juliet and nurse scene. So not a ton to say about this. This is Juliet's soliloquy. Again, we look at these lines here. Up here it says, enter Juliet. Okay, she's the only one on stage. Therefore, when she's speaking, it's a soliloquy. She's talking to herself. I don't know if any of you spend this many words talking to yourself when you're talking to yourself, but Juliet sure goes on this big long rant talking to herself. And the one line maybe we'll point out is line 26 or so. This one here. Oh, I have bought the mansion of a love, but not possessed it. And though I am sold, not yet enjoyed. Okay? So what's the mansion that she has bought? So she has bought a house, but has not yet lived in it. In other words, she has gotten married and yet not practiced being married. She has not lived with her husband. She's not been a wife really to him. He has not really been a husband to her yet. So that's in essence what she is saying in this whole little bit right there, is she is married yet has not practiced marriage. Now, what does marriage include? Okay, well, marriage includes living with your spouse, building a home, and building a family with your spouse, and hopefully doing so publicly, because a marriage is a public profession of your commitment to that person, so that you can be best equipped to be faithful to one another, to love each other, and to build a house to give your children the fairest and best and loving chance to live. And that's the point of marriage. That's what they understood back in this time too. Yet Juliet has had none of that other than the wedding itself. So she's longing to practice her marriage publicly and to be to be a wife to Romeo. So that's what that says. Yet it's interesting because now this just makes it even more exaggerated, the fact that this can't happen, because by the end we know Romeo's banished. So it makes it even worse. Okay. By the way, I don't know what the friar's plan was to make it public and to actually get that wedding on the roll so that this could happen more publicly sooner. Now there's no question of when this is going to happen. It's not going to happen for a very long time, with a lot of work and a lot of negotiation and whatever. Romeo being a criminal and all. All right. The next line is 38 here. Well, he's dead. And then the nurse comes, talks, Romeo. Oh, Romeo. And then Juliet's like, oh, if it's Romeo, say I. If not, say no. And then the nurse says, I saw the wound I saw to my eyes. She's not giving the true answer here. And Juliet is led to believe then that somebody has died, and that her suspicion is telling her from the nurse's reaction that it's actually Romeo, which would have been terrible. Okay, they're just married. She's just been desiring lifelong love and marriage to Romeo, just up at the top there. And now it's impossible because Romeo's dead. Well, it doesn't turn out that way. Eventually the nurse reveals Tybalt has died and not Romeo. So now Juliet's mixed. And then she finds out that Romeo's banished and Romeo killed Tybalt here. Okay. And then we have Juliet's reaction here. And I love these little things. I probably won't pick out all of them here, but between line 73 and line 85, we have serpent hearts, a deceiving heart, beautiful tyrant, angelical fiend, dove raven, a wolf lamb, a damned saint, an honorable villain, so fairly bound. Okay, a gorgeous palace is another one. So all of these complete paradoxes, these opposites. Rome as much of this beautiful thing that Romeo is, there's this deep evil in him, and she's saying there's this deep paradox or this conflict between them that she hadn't seen before. Okay, now she's torn. My husband's a murderer. He killed my cousin. So who do I? Now she's torn. Who do I owe my allegiance to? Tybalt, who's my family, or Romeo, who's my husband, who killed my family? What a hard situation for Juliet. I think by the end she decides that it's Romeo she needs to be faithful to. Okay, so let's go ahead to line 123, and this is a little point of foreshadowing. Is father, mother, Tybalt, Romeo, Juliet, all slain, all dead? To hear the word banished is like saying everyone's died. So she accepts the word banishment as being so bad that it would have been the same as if the nurse came in and said, your whole family's dead, and Romeo. But the nurse comes and says, Romeo's banished. And Juliet's saying, that's as bad as if everybody was dead. Now, that's showing us that that this is how hard Juliet's taking this, but it's also showing us foreshadowing because of death, of this reference to death and them all dying. Okay. Now, that is a look at this scene here. Juliet's weeping. Okay. Now, Juliet's committed to essentially being a widow. She's just married and she's saying, I'm a widow. Romeo's as good as dead, being banished. So she's basically given herself up to moping and crying for the death of Romeo, and she is now a widow, okay? Or a metaphorical widow, or something like a widow. Imagine being a widow like a couple hours after your wedding. I'm sure it's happened. So now we get to the last scene of this section, scene 3. I hope you looked at the scenes of this one that I shared with you from the movies as well. Romeo is pathetic. And so let's see what we can come up with here. So we're jumping straight away to line 41-ish. Okay, Romeo hears, you're banished. He says, don't tell me I'm banished. I have to leave Verona. And he says, okay, maggot flies can fly around in Verona. They can, land on Juliet's lips. They can see Juliet, even the flies, so the things that hatch from maggots can do this, but I can't. I thought I get a kick out of that when Romeo's saying, all these things can, see Juliet, but I can't, because even a fly can, but I can't. It's just how low he feels as somebody. Her husband cannot, because he's banished. Okay, the next one is line 83 or so. We go down. Okay. By then, the nurse, now Romeo's spazzing through all of this stuff. Okay. And is inconsolable. There's nothing the friar can say to get him to his senses. Okay. The nurse shows up on the scene. She asks, how's Romeo? And friar says, he's there on the ground with his own tears made drunk. He's having his little tantrum fit on the ground, kicking and screaming on the ground. So Romeo, pathetic little man right there. We have line 106, a little bit further down here. Romeo says this. Tell me, in what part of my body does my name lodge? Okay, Romeo or Montague. Tell me that I may sack the hateful mansion. And he draws his sword. In other words, that I may tear it out, that I may cut it out. Where is it? Where is my evil name, that I may cut it out and now make all things better? Well, of course we know it's, you cut out your name. You can't, but let's say it's your heart. You cut it out. Well, you die. So this is kind of a threat to suicide here. And it's, again, a little bit of foreshadowing. Friar Lawrence at this point knows that it's a desperate situation, and he snaps Romeo out of it. Line 115 or so. Hast thou slain Tybalt, wilt thou slay thyself? And in slaying yourself, doing damned hate upon thyself. Okay, this is all perspective of suicide at the time. Even senses of suicide today. Damning yourself, to take your own life, is very, very grave. A lot of people do it because they're not fully mentally well. A mentally well person would never or rarely consider ending their own life. It is a very extreme situation, even back in this time. And to think about suicide would be damnation to you. You don't end your life. You don't. That's a serious, grave thing. It damns you. It insults and it disrespects heaven. Okay, so the thought at the time was that those who commit suicide in their life is like, that's a pretty severe, unforgivable thing. Okay, so you don't do that. Now, the talk about suicide or the theme of suicide is part of this story as we get towards the tragedy at the end. Okay, there are a bunch of reasons that the friar eventually is able to give. He says, "Thou art happy," a couple times. Okay, here we are. Juliet is alive. So starting line 134. Juliet's alive. Your wife is still alive and well. Be happy. Tybalt would kill thee. So Tybalt came to kill you, remember, but you killed him. So be happy. Because you may have been dead, but you're not. And then the last one is that the law says that you should have died, but you have been given exile, which means you're still alive and we can make this better. Therefore, thou art happy. So the friar points out all the goodness in this worst ever situation for Romeo. And I like that. Okay. A pack of blessings lights up your back. Sometimes people going through the deepest tragedies, they're blind to the blessings that are actually there. And it takes time sometimes for you to look in hindsight and realize, wow, these were all the things at work, and there was some light in that dark time. The Friar Lawrence is able to show Romeo, this is a bad situation, but look at all the good things. Okay, look at all the good things. And Romeo does snap out of it. And so at the end of the scene, we have Romeo heading up to spend the night with Juliet. Go forward with the plan. Okay. Now they have to change the plan up a little bit because Romeo has to go be in Mantua, but they'll be in touch and we'll see what happens next. Take care, guys. Don't be lame. Hopefully you enjoyed all of that. A lot packed in there.